Now you can understand why we got to 2007 and 2000. Where did subprime mortgages come from? Because eventually when you get into recency bias and confirmation bias, you start thinking, this is great. This is awesome. We're financial institutions that can basically print money and intermediate it at the same time, which means we can do anything. So after a while where it appears like nothing goes wrong, you start thinking nothing will ever go wrong. And so everybody just starts creating money out of thin air and doing the stupidest things with it because it seems like it works and will always work.
So we'll take all these mortgage liabilities, we'll wrap them up,
and we'll sell them to everybody.
We'll sell them to everyone.
And including each other. We'll buy them ourselves. It's even more complicated than that because then you use those securities as the basis for some of these funding relationships and repo and derivatives and things like that. But by and large, that's what it really is. It's a cabal of insiders that control money. That's how we went from, the 1960s and 70s with little quaint banks. And yes, there were state regulations, national regulations, making sure that banks didn't cross state lines, but even international banks were all tiny. Then you get into the 90s, 2000s, banks are everywhere. Financial institutions are everywhere. They're huge. It's like they've taken over because, as the Austrians say, Cantillon effects, those who create money get the benefits first. They absolutely did that. And so where did too big to fail come from? That wasn't the government. That was the banking system wanting to hold on to the status quo, which privileged them. Not just privileged them in terms of being able to create this money and keep this ledger system going, but also the information asymmetry that left them on top of everything.
But was it also that they could create the economic boom by having control of the money, which would ultimately lead to the success of the banks and the people who are making those decisions being paid well, receiving big bonuses? Is that essentially what creates that contagion?
Yeah, and look, let's face it, that there were positive benefits to this. Again, there's a reason why governments let this system go for as long as they did, because by and large, apart from the great inflation, but especially the 1980s, 90s, and middle 2000s, which was called the so-called Great Moderation for a reason, because it did spread prosperity around much of the world. You think about China, emerging markets, China in particular. 1980s, China was an agrarian subsistence economy. Nowadays, it's an industrial powerhouse. That was financed by this monetary expansion in the Eurodollar system. So it's not like bankers were just a bunch of evil, greedy bastards who said, we're going to just create money for our own benefit. They were doing it because they were filling a role that the global economy needed. Again, Triffin's paradox. As that happened, it created GDP and output around the rest of the world, created prosperity through many of these places. It started getting into extremes where it thought, well, let's do more. Let's do only more. Let's do riskier things because it can't possibly go wrong. Look at the prosperity we're creating here. And that's what happened. Natural human cycles, natural human fallibilities, except there was no check on that system. Because it was not perfectly, because it was incredibly elastic, the money creation function just got way out of hand.
And is there any oversight of this Eurodollar?
Not really.
Huh.
And do we know how much money is in that system?
I have no idea.
Crazy.
And that's the thing. You go back to, say, the 1960s, 70s, a few institutions like the BIS tried to keep track. Because this is offshore, first of all, it's outside the regulatory authority of anybody. So you have a bank in the Cayman Islands or the city of London or Zurich or whatever. They may be physically located in those places, but those places, the governments in those local jurisdictions have privileged the banking system and said, okay, you're a bank in the city of London. As long as your clients aren't UK citizens, we don't care what you do. So if you're an international bank and you want no regulation, set up shop in the city of London or in the Cayman Islands. You go to the Cayman Islands, where it's this massive US dollar denominated redistribution point for the Eurodollar system. You would think these huge banks are all located there. There aren't any banks on the island. There's no big vaults, no cash there. It's all accountants and attorneys and lobbyists.
So is it just a big IOU system?
Yes. Claims. So we started out with claims on actual cash, but this system is more efficient when we don't have to transact in cash. So instead of me giving you actual cash, I'll just pay you next week. So now we create a series of cash flows that are treated as cash, and we'll even discount the value and call it a present value and say that's worth this future cash flow that I've just created. It's worth X. Now I put that on my balance sheet, and it's as if it's actual money.
Where is this primary? Where does this turn up in the economic system? Where does it turn up in the economy? Who are using these Eurodollars? I know these banks are, but where's the output going to?
Loans,
Loans.
debt,
And how-
securities, financial markets.
And how's that turned into actual money that people can use?
When you go to the gas station or grocery store,
Yeah.
do you use actual cash, or do you use a credit card, a debit card, or your phone,
Well, yeah, I use any of those, but
or a check?
but my assumption is that the banks in the UK, there are settlements between them, or are they the same cash and equivalents?
It's
They do
all
have
ledger
vaults.
money system.
Everything's ledger money system.
Even ATMs nowadays aren't even used. And it's been this way for, like I said, over a century. So even before we got to, electronic payment, cash, debit cards and all that, people wrote checks. And what is a check? A check is every bit like cash, but it's a paper claim on another bank's cash. So you go to the grocery store, I write a check, I give the grocery store a check, they give me goods, therefore I've got, there's a legitimate real economy transaction that took place. But what happens behind the scenes? This is the part nobody ever thinks about. Behind the scenes, that check is then presented for payment from one bank to the next. And so all the bank has to do is say, oh, I'll credit you this number of dollars on your account with me. We don't need to exchange any cash at all. It's just a ledger book entry system.
So the Eurodollar actually has nothing to do with the dollar apart from the fact it's pegged to it?
It's not pegged. It's just denominated in U.S. dollars out of convenience.
Fine.
So it's not actually U.S. dollars or even claims on U.S.
Well,
dollars.
what is it pegged? But if I have one Eurodollar, is that worth the same as one US
Yeah,
dollar?
because there is no Eurodollar. Eurodollar is itself a derivative term. It's euro simply means offshore. So you see the term euro in front of a currency.
Offshore dollars.
Offshore dollars. So these are dollars that exist outside the United States, except they're virtual dollars.
So if I wanted to, say me, you, Danny, Jeremy, say we created our own little economy between us, we could do a double accounting. We could call it the Peter dollar, and we could create 100 each, and we could transact between ourselves if we wanted to.
Right.
But then maybe I want to go and buy a car, and I could use that, and I would have that relationship with that bank to turn that to create an asset and a liability outside of our little system.
Yep. It's essentially what happened in 2017 with the ICO craze.
Yeah.
Everybody tried to create their own coins, which is basically let's recreate the Eurodollar. And the Eurodollar wasn't itself a brand new innovation either. Ghost money and ledger money goes back centuries. You can go back to the bullion famine in Europe in the 14th and 15th century for ghost money and fictional currencies that arose because of a shortage of silver coin across Europe. So this idea that we create our own currency amongst a small group of people, distributed ledger, and just keep track on a ledger, that goes back centuries. This is something that humans have done in any situation where actual official money becomes scarce. When it becomes inelastic, we create other means of payment because money is a tool for commerce. It always comes back to commerce and economy. And if there's a shortage of money, commerce demands you create new forms.
So what is the consequence of having this system? And is it a net positive or net negative for the US?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I think you would say that obviously for the US and for the world at large, it was a net positive up until 2007.
Right.
It obviously went too far, got into the extremes, but I mean, we had the 1980s and 1990s were legitimate economic growth, robust economic growth during those periods, and not just in the US, all across the world. So the monetary system obviously performed what it was supposed to perform, the function of medium of exchange and unit of account, and it did those things very well. It kind of got out into the extreme situation around 1995 or so, and then obviously led to the collapse afterwards.
But is it one of these things whereby it's a great system that drives economic growth and prosperity, but in the end, debts have to be repaid, everything has to come back to equilibrium, and therefore we now have to go through this very painful period to get us back to equilibrium?
And that's really the argument, right? Is it worth it? Is it worth 20 years of prosperity for maybe 20 years or more of misery and deflation?
Or during that 20 years of prosperity and 20 years of misery, is it fair, or are there some people who benefit?
Yeah.
You know, if you go through the period of prosperity, you're going to create a lot of rich people, and those rich people maybe can survive the economic downturn better because they have the right assets, the right wealth, the right stores of wealth. Whereas those who maybe have seen a rise in their prosperity relative to what it would have been, but are going through the most difficult economic hardship over the next 20 years.
Yeah, it just disappears.
Yeah.
Which is the historical argument against deflationary depressions from the very beginning, since they first showed up in the early 1800s. And people are like, what the hell is this? Why do we have widespread unemployment? It's the idea that when you have currency become too inelastic, when the people who do well, and we want them to do well during boom times, because people doing well during boom times are what creates the boom. So we want rich people. We want some level of inequality, because that's what free markets and capitalism means. However, when the currency switch gets flipped to inelasticity and deflation, then you have the downside. Then you have the argument of whether or not, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the maybe inevitable consequences of these boom-bust cycles? And that's a tricky thing, because the people on top who benefit the most are going to resist doing anything, right? They're going to say, well, we had it really good, and we don't want to change anything. And you're right, there are all sorts of questions about fairness and equality and distribution, as well as economic questions about sustainability and efficiency.
The portfolio that performs in one economic regime can get crushed in the next. So in this free webinar, we're going to reveal what those 4 economic regimes are, how to identify them, as well as the assets, historically speaking, best positioned to perform in every environment. So reserve your seat now and learn how to prepare your portfolio before the economy shifts again.